Buenas tardes. Ladies and gentlemen, there are few topics that get me more upset than discussing U.S. policy in Latin America in this century. Our position towards the region can most charitably be explained as benign neglect. Our woke culture can simply not tolerate any policy towards the region which smacks of paternalism or colonialism. Historically, the U.S. has played a significant role in the affairs of countries south of its borders, often utilizing both diplomatic and military means to exert its influence. The Monroe Doctrine, a policy which was quite harsh about foreign involvements in the region, had been the guidepost for 200 years. Unfortunately, our State Department under John Kerry officially announced it dead in 2013. While the left tends to treat the Monroe Doctrine as a symbol of the imposition of U.S. hegemony, despite those divergent views, the right regards it as a defense of U.S. strategic interests in the hemisphere. Despite those divergent views, the Monroe Doctrine deserves reviewed attention. Revisiting it should lead us to ask anew how to appropriately engage with our neighbors in Latin America, a task made even more imperative today by the troubling and often unnoticed activities of China, Russia, and Iran in the hemisphere we share. Chinese-funded projects in the region confront the weakness of Latin American institutions, their vulnerability to corruption, and the self-exclusion by some governments from more traditional sources of loans and investment, all of which decrease the likelihood that the region will benefit from these projects. And politicians and businessmen hesitate to speak critically of Chinese behaviors out of fear that such talk will jeopardize the Chinese markets that they hope to access or the partnerships they hope to forge. The result is often that elites overestimate the probability of securing the hoped-for benefits from Chinese, while underestimating the risks. In recent decades, however, we have witnessed a shift in approach towards a more nuanced and cooperative engagement with Latin American nations, which has led to the signing of trade agreements, joint security initiatives, and efforts to promote sustainable development across the region. However, it is important to acknowledge that challenges remain in the U.S.-Latin America relationship. Issues such as drug trafficking, political instability, and corruption continue to pose significant obstacles to progress and stability in the region. The U.S. must continue to work with its partners in Latin America to address these challenges through dialogue, cooperation, and shared responsibility. And should a Chinese invasion of Taiwan lead to war with the U.S., the commercial presence and military relationships China has built in the Western Hemisphere will likely be used to disrupt U.S. deployment and sustainment flows. China would, for example, shut down the Panama Canal and the Straits of Magellan, attack U.S. space assets from the Western Hemisphere, or project forces against the U.S. from dual-use ports and other facilities in the region. But Chinese influence in the Western Hemisphere is not the only concern. Threats posed by Iranian and Russian engagement are even more direct. Iran has worked through surrogate organizations such as Hezbollah to orchestrate terrorist operations, and just this past June, Iranian President Raisi traveled to Latin America, meeting and signing agreements with Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. Separately, Iran signed a defense cooperation agreement with Bolivia. Escalating tension with the U.S. in the Middle East only increases Iran's interest in expanding its re-engagement with the region. Russia, like Iran, has periodically sought to challenge the United States through partnerships with anti-U.S. regimes. The threats the U.S. faces in Latin America are real and pressing. They involve regimes, China, Russia, Iran, that undermine our interests in other regions of the world. What then should our response be? In the spirit of the original Monroe Doctrine, dialogue with the region over the activities of China, Russia, and Iran must convey a sense of solidarity and shared interests, not a U.S. imposition. In shaping the region's choices, the balance between U.S.-friendly democracies versus anti-U.S. populist regimes will become ever more important. The U.S. should also redouble its efforts to educate regional partners about the perils of Russian information operations, Iranian surrogate terrorist networks, and other threats. As the Monroe Doctrine turns 200, its continued success depends upon Latin America's choices rather than its obedience. If Latin America stands in solidarity with the U.S. against the new generation of extra-hemispheric threats, It'll be not because the U.S. demands it, but because the region recognizes that doing so is in its own self-interest. Today, approximately 18% of the U.S. population is Latino Americans, totaling more than 50 million people, mostly of Mexican and Central American background. It is high time that our State Department starts to prioritize Latin America.